Have you ever met a woman who carries herself with a quiet kind of certainty? Not because she's loud, not because she demands attention, but because she knows something? Something unshakable, something that makes certain people, especially narcissists, uncomfortable, even afraid. At first glance, you might mistake her solitude for loneliness, her silence for submission, but the truth is far more fascinating. She isn't missing anything. She has simply stopped playing the game. And that's exactly what unsettles those who thrive on control, on manipulation, on the unspoken rules of power. Carl Jung once said, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." And here's the thing, the woman who has faced her own shadow, who has wrestled with the parts of herself she once feared or denied, becomes something rare, whole. And wholeness is terrifying to those who rely on fragmentation, on keeping others small, uncertain, dependent. Think about it. What does a narcissist feed on? Chaos, reaction, the desperate need for validation. But what happens when a woman no longer needs their approval? When she no longer jumps at their provocations, no longer bends to their guilt, their drama, their manufactured crises? She becomes something they cannot manipulate, something they cannot use. And that is when the fear sets in, because she isn't just refusing them, she's reflecting them, their own emptiness, their own unintegrated shadows. And nothing is more unsettling to someone who avoids self-awareness than a mirror they cannot distort or dismiss. You see, this isn't about coldness, it isn't about hardness, it's about clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when a woman stops asking, "Do you see me?" and starts declaring, "I see myself." The moment she stops seeking permission to exist, that's the moment she becomes untouchable in the way that matters most. But society will misunderstand. Of course it will. It will call her detached, unfeeling, even broken. Because how else can it explain a woman who chooses herself? A woman who would rather sit in the quiet truth of her own company than stand in the noise of false connections? Yet here's the secret. Her solitude isn't emptiness. It's sanctuary. It's the space where she hears her own voice again, where she remembers who she was before the world told her who to be. And that kind of remembering, it's revolutionary. So, if you've ever been called too much for setting boundaries or too cold for refusing to perform, know this. What they fear isn't your weakness, it's your strength. The strength of a woman who has looked into her own shadows and decided unflinchingly to embrace them. Because once you do that, no one can weaponize your darkness against you ever again. And that is power. There's a particular kind of silence that drives narcissists mad. It's not the silence of submission, nor the quiet of defeat. It's the silence of a woman who watches, who sees without reacting, who listens without scrambling to appease. It's the silence of someone who has learned the most dangerous truth of all. Not everything deserves a response. And that's the thing. They need your reaction. Like oxygen to a flame, their sense of control depends on it. Without it, they're left with nothing but the echo of their own emptiness. Seneca once wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." But what about the courage not to engage? The courage to let a manipulative remark hang in the air unanswered? The courage to walk away without explanation? That's the alchemy they can't comprehend. Because while they're waiting for the fight, the tears, the frantic justification, you've already left the battlefield. Not physically, necessarily, but internally. You've withdrawn the one thing they thought they owned, your attention. Jung called this the shadow work, the unglamorous, often painful process of reclaiming the parts of yourself you were taught to disown, the anger you weren't allowed to express, the instincts you were told to ignore, the needs you learned to suppress. And when a woman integrates these fragments, she stops leaking energy into the void of other people's demands. She becomes contained. And containment is a narcissist's worst nightmare. Think of the women who unsettle them the most. The ones who can't be baited into public drama. who refuse to perform vulnerability on command, who don't rush to fill awkward silences with nervous chatter. They're often labeled cold, calculating, or emotionally unavailable. But the real question is, unavailable to whom? To those who see emotions as tools for extraction? To those who mistake openness for invitation? There's a profound difference between being closed off and being selective, between shutting down and choosing where your energy flows. And this is where the projection begins. Because to someone who views intimacy as conquest, your boundaries don't read as self-respect. They read as rejection, as threat. But here's what they can't grasp. Your silence isn't about them at all. It's about you. The you that no longer twists herself into shapes to fit their expectations. The you that has outgrown the hunger for their validation. The you that understands deep in your bones that not all battles are worth fighting, but the war for your own soul, that one is non-negotiable. So the next time you feel pressured to explain, to soften, to make yourself more palatable, pause. Remember, the most powerful thing you can do is often nothing. Not the nothing of passivity, but the nothing of the Sphinx, the nothing of the moon, watching the tides without rushing to calm them. Because the woman who knows her own worth doesn't need to prove it, and that is what they'll never forgive. There comes a moment in a woman's life when she stops asking, "Why don't they see me?" and starts realizing the far more dangerous question, "What if they never will?" And that is the moment her power becomes unassailable. Because here's the truth narcissists can't afford to face. A woman who no longer seeks external validation cannot be controlled. A woman who has made peace with being misunderstood cannot be manipulated. A woman who has touched the depths of her own shadow and emerged, not broken, but forged. She is the one they will either worship or destroy. But here's the secret. She cannot be destroyed. Not really. Jung wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And he was right. Because when a woman accepts herself, her darkness, her light, her contradictions, her messy humanity, she becomes something beyond the grasp of those who feed on fragmentation. She becomes whole. And wholeness, to the narcissistic mind, is an act of rebellion. Think of the women throughout history who unsettled the status quo. The ones labeled witches, hysterics, too intense, too emotional, too much. What was the real crime? They refused to compartmentalize themselves into socially acceptable boxes. They dared to be all of it. The fury and the tenderness, the logic and the intuition, the fire and the stillness. And that's what frightens them most. Not your anger, not your boundaries, not even your success, but your integration. The way you can be both soft and unyielding. The way you can walk away without hatred, because indifference is the true death of their power. The way you no longer need them to be the villain in your story, because you've outgrown the need for the story at all. This is the final stage of the alchemy. When you realize their fear of you was never about your weakness, but about the strength you didn't yet know you had. When you understand that the loneliness you once feared was actually the birthplace of your sovereignty. When you stop waiting for permission to exist and simply do. So let them misunderstand. Let them whisper. Let them try to punish you with silence when silence is now your native language. You are no longer playing the game. You are the game. And that is how revolutions begin. If this found its way to you, if it echoed something you already knew but needed to hear out loud, then it was meant for you. Not for the likes, not for the shares, but for you. For the part of you that's been waiting for a sign, for permission, for a reason to stop apologizing for taking up space. This is it. Now go and be unbreakable.